So I'd like to introduce Tom McGovern. Tom is an archaeologist and professor at Hunter College, City University of New York, where he's also associate director of the Human Ecodynamics Research Center. And he's founder of a large international effort to understand coupled human and natural systems across many temporal and spatial scales. He's also an expert on the archaeology in Norse Greenland, which is handy, and long-term human-climate interactions in the high North Atlantic. And the title of his talk today is Local and Traditional Knowledge on the Millennial Scale, Sustainable Waterfowl Management from Viking Age Iceland. Thanks, Tom.
And as you can see, we have an ongoing tradition of way too many logos and way too many authors. And I think this is really part of how we've been working for quite a long time. And the strategy we've had in putting together international interdisciplinary research cooperatives, and that's what we're talking about. Very much like an old-fashioned farmers co-op. It's very much bottom-up, not top-down. People working together on common problems across multiple disciplines. You can see from all the different authors we've got here, and by the way, the first four are all grad students. We're really all about trying to bring people along with the data sets so that we bring along the expert with the data, so we're not using old stuff, we're using cutting edge, and it's also just a whole lot more fun. Okay, I can spend lots of time going through all logos, but I won't. I'll cut to the chase. This is our original oldest logo. This is the NABO group. NABO is one of those clever acronyms in many Scandinavian languages. It means neighbor, and we've been trying to help each other in a neighborly fashion for about 20 some odd years now, and attracted nice chunks of funding into the area, in the IPY, and before and after. So lots of good stuff happening here. I recommend take a look at our website, because that's where you'll see lots of downloadable material. There's over 100 downloadable PDFs there. There's contacts, all sorts of people working in the North Atlantic. If you want to know more about any of the stuff we're doing, look there. This is also to remind me to remind you that I'm not presenting anything resembling my own research. This is very much a team effort, and I'm just a spokesperson. So don't ask me any hard questions. Okay, so here we have a presentation which is going to talk a little about the Faroe Islands, a little about Iceland, a little about traditional knowledge, and I'm using the S word. And every time you use the S word, you really need to think about defining what the heck it is you mean, because sustainability has been used so often as to be emptied of meaning. So sustainability isn't very sustainable. So we have then the issue of what do you mean by sustainability? And we suggest that Marty Endery's 4 questions are worth asking every time someone says sustainability. Of what, for whom, for how long, and at what cost? And at least a couple of those questions get directly to the archaeology. So let's head off for that. I should mention that the Faroese work I'm presenting is the work of Seth Brewington, one of our excellent graduate students at CUNY. Okay, here's what Faroese villages look like. We now know they've been there since about 700 AD, and yes, that's before the Norse get there. We now have excellent dates indicating on both animal bones now as well as on carbonized barley that somebody is home by 600 or so. Now, these villages have long, long lifespans. They're still occupied. If you look up the slope there, you'll see fields which are used for growing barley, and those too have a long ancestry. Our soil scientists are giving us information telling us that those fields actually are plagan fields. They're human creations up to 1 meter or more deep of soil brought in and fertilized through time. So this landscape you're seeing is very much an anthropogenic landscape from early on. Now further up the slope, you can see common grazing land, and further up from there, there's some cliffs. So we think about the cultural landscape of the Faroes. You have sea. You have the village infield area was heavily fertilized, long-term investment in place. You have the outfield, and then you have the fowling cliffs. And the Faroes, of course, are famous for birds, and especially for puffins. And in the historic past, down to the present, puffins provide a lot of food for the Faroese. Puffin isn't just it's not just a snack food anymore, something you have all the time. So they may be cute, but they're tasty. Now, the other thing to notice about them is they nest at the top of the sea stack, which makes them inherently much more vulnerable than other seabirds to predation of all kinds, dogs, pigs, people, you name it. Which gets us this question, how far back in time has this pattern of puffin predation extended? And this gets us the archaeology. Here's one of those nicely stratified, deep archaeological sites that we love so much that are eroding away into the sea so rapidly. This site at Undion Kornsfloti on Sandoy in the Faroes, And these two chaps are standing there, are busy doing archaeology there. I'm glad to say both of them subsequently got PhDs and jobs. Right below where Jim is standing down towards the bottom is where we have now recovered the pre-Norse layers, so it extends from pre-Norse periods up to about 1250 or so. Okay, so what do we get out of this? Way too many bar charts. There's a lot more data here we have time to talk about, so let me just flag up very quickly these three phases of Underjungfruns floating archaeofauna or animal bone collection. The key thing to look at here within domestic animal bones is the red bar. That's pigs. Pig bones are present in substantial numbers in all of the major phases, again, going from just pre-Viking period up through the mid-1200s, so high Middle Ages. Now, after this point, pigs become rare in both the archaeofauna and landscape. If we take a look at the same data set, but now zooming out, again, looking just at the Faroe Islands stuff for a moment, the yellow bars here are bird bones. Haven't got time to explain it all, but I think you can read this graph pretty clearly. Boy, are these people eating a lot of birds. So pigs and birds, mostly puffins. These are 90% puffin bones. Huge archaeofauna. You're looking at about 200,000 bones in just one picture here. Clear picture. Pigs and puffins through time. If you Google for pigs, this is the sort of thing you get. They're cute, they reproduce rapidly, and they're tasty. They're great animals for putting onto islands because they fill them up really quickly. And if you let them loose, they're no trouble at all, except, of course, when they turn to swine. Swine, if you Google for them, are these ecocidal monsters that require eradication. If you Google for swine, the next thing you get is swine eradication. And everybody around the world is working really hard to get feral swine out of their environments, especially because they are just hell on bird colonies. You can see where we're going with this. Okay, so piggery strategies. Traditionally, in northwestern Europe, there are two different but interlocking strategies. One of them is pannage, more or less free range if you've got the space. The other is sty raising, and of course, these aren't mutually exclusive. We have, thanks to our friends in the stable isotope business in the Scottish universities, ways of using nitrogen carbon to pull out both food web, a bunch of things about food web. I won't go into this great detail, but basically this is some of our pig data set. The yellow is the Faroese. And one thing you can see there from the isotopes, nitrogen carbon, is that some of the Faroese, yellow pigs, are in the marine food web. And they're fairly carnivorous, which suggests that they're probably being fed fish heads, which is about what you'd expect given the rest of the economy. The majority of those yellow markers, though, are firmly within the terrestrial food web. These pigs are on land. They're not being fed fish heads. They're not being penned up. So how are they keeping them away from the puffins? That gets us to place names. Now, throughout the North Atlantic, place names are present at very high density across the landscape. If you're doing survey with an Icelandic farmer walking along, here's a rock. He stands on the rock and says, "This is where Gunnar said," and then he recites from memory for 10 minutes from the sagas. Wow. You say, what about that rock? You're like, that's just a rock. You have to know. But they do know. And place names have been recorded since the 19th century, and there's, as we'll see, it's a major thing that people are doing today. Okay, so our Faroese colleague Simon Arya went through and found all the pig place names throughout the Faroes, over 140 different place names, and some of them can be localized onto our island where we're working here of Sandoy. If we do field survey to track down where these place names are, there's an interesting pattern. Some of them are places like Svinatofter, where the pigs are led along. There's a little wall going on here, an enclosure. My favorite is Grisgather, the pig dikes. As you can see from the arrows here, these are walls which are designed to keep the pigs penned up against the sea cliffs so they couldn't really get out very much. So what we're getting here then is that swine in the Faroes are an important food source down to about 1250 or so, after which they begin to decline, and by the 1700s, they're very, very rare. Place names suggest you're talking about some pretty highly controlled herding. The pigs are being moved very carefully across the landscape. They're not free-ranging at all. They're being kept out of the heavily fertilized home fields. They're being kept away from the highly vulnerable puffin cliffs. So these pigs are being treated as dangerous animals, as well as being productive. Ultimately, the Faroese make the decision that despite the fact they taste good and they're high status food, they're not worth keeping in the environment. They're too dangerous, so they take them out. So we have then piggery is falling to puffins. And the local and traditional knowledge, LTK, that is embedded in the place names is still there. People remember where the pigs were. People still use the pig place names to get around the landscape, which is one thing to think about. We're thinking about an Anthropocene. If we're thinking about when does the Anthropocene start, there isn't time in the world enough to discuss that here. I'm not going to. But if you think about islands as places where people get to in the post-Pleistocene, the Anthropocene comes to those islands pretty abruptly. In this particular case, this Anthropocene wasn't involved in a tragedy of the commons, in a reckless destruction of landscape and resources. And we'll come back to that in a moment. Let's very quickly look at another case in Iceland. This is also the work of an ACE graduate student, Megan Hicks, who's gotten NSF funding to push this forward. Lake Mývatn is in northern Iceland, and the name means Midge Lake. Now, the longer you look at this picture, the worse it gets. Every single dot you see on there is a black fly. And that Icelander has just got iron control. Okay, so we have then, there's a few flies, but they're the base of a food web that feed lots of ducks and trout. So as a result, Mývatn is this incredibly rich environmental area, and it is a World Heritage Site today because this is one of the only places on Earth where ducks come, waterfowl come, from both hemispheres to breed and raise their young. So to this day, about 30,000 waterfowl visit every spring. They're coming in right now. Since 1850 or so, we know from records that local farmers collect about 10,000 eggs per year, but they do it sustainably without reducing the yield of the ducks. And it's pretty straightforward rules, although there's a lot of complexity to them. The basic idea is you don't take all the eggs from any nest, and you don't kill the adults. So one question is, how long has that gone on? The archaeology turns out an interesting answer. The middle picture here of these smashed eggshells is an archaeological picture. Those are Viking age duck eggshells. We know they're Viking age both from multiple radiocarbon dates, but all through the wonderful, wonderful volcanic tephra that blanket Iceland. They're resting on what's called the London tephra of 871 plus or minus 2. It's dated that closely because we also get it in the Greenland ice cores. Okay, so this is the first point where humans start getting into Iceland, this part of Iceland, at least in large numbers. And in every single case, we have about 7 different sites. We have this in the same Mývatn area. There are sheets of duck eggshells down on the surface of this tephra. And there's eggshells throughout the succeeding layers as you go up in time as well. So people are certainly going after those eggshells, eggs, in a big way. What we don't find is adult bird bones. Now, as you can see here from these rather cool scanning electron microscope images, there's an active cooperation going on now with the bioscience people in the university in Iceland to really get us down to species level identification, not just ducks versus other birds, and that's really going really well. So that's going ahead very nicely, but even before that's completed, we have a really interesting story here of millennial scale sustainable use of what's an inherently very fragile resource. Remember, all you have to do is cheat, take all the eggs, kill the adults. Pretty soon it all falls apart, and there is no World Heritage Site today, but there is. Okay, back to stable isotopes, back to pigs. Okay, now we're looking at other pig bones, and we're flagging up here. And again, what you're seeing here is most of the pigs from Iceland, from Mývatn especially, are again in the terrestrial food web. Some of them in that lower square, the one with the red dots in it, are apparently being fed trout. These are trout-fed pigs, and they are present only on the elite Viking Age sites that have feasting going on. So if you want to throw a good party in the Viking Age, you hand feed your pigs trout. I have never had a trout-fed pig, but I'm looking forward to the opportunity first chance I get. However, the takeaway here is these pigs are, again, on the terrestrial landscape. How do you keep the pigs separate from the nesting bird colonies? How do you manage that? The obvious thing to do is, again, look for place names, and that's what we're engaged in doing. But it gives me a moment to take a small tangent into looking at the work we're now doing in terms of using maps and GIS to use location as a way of getting different disciplines to talk effectively to each other. Here we're putting saga scholars and archaeologists and modern environmental managers onto the same GIS page to try to get a sense of not only place names, but archaeological sites, trackways, all sorts of things are being built up through this approach. This is part of an international program, now part of IHOPE, the Integrated History and Future of People on Earth, and GAIA, Global Human Economics Alliance. We're going to try to get you to join all that before you leave, which is working on a project called Inscribing Environmental Memory in the Icelandic Sagas. The shorthand, Sagas for Sustainability, probably tells you everything you need to know here, but the idea is to mobilize the really complex, really interesting record of the Icelandic past, the written indigenous northern record. This unique written record produced by indigenous northern people over thousands of years, 8,000 years, is something of great potential value to lots of us. So the question is how to get this going, and there it is. Okay, looking at climate impacts and correlation causation, this is a annual scale proxy climate record. It's not actually new anymore. I know it's been superseded, but this is the old Bradley et al. Curve, adjusted for our part of northern Iceland by Richard Streeter, University of St. Andrews. And what he's doing then is showing divergences from the 30-year means for the weather station Akureyri. As you can see there, we can also put some information on from volcanic tephra. One tephra is dated to 940 AD. Another one's dated to 1102. And for some reason, we have serious settlement in the higher elevations in our part of Iceland after the 940 tephra fall, and that settlement seems to be pretty much ending and abandonments coming in by about 1100, or by the 1104 tephra, lots of abandonments taking place. If you take a look at this multi-proxy record, the idea that this has something to do with this peak of warming is hard to avoid. Correlation is not necessarily causation, but it's a good start. The point here is that thanks to the work of people in this room, we cultural people, we people dealing with humans, can work on the human scale of years when we're trying to understand the impact of climate change on decision making, on farmer strategies, on settlement strategies in particular places. Now, if we can also get our geographical models crunched down a bit, this gives us an opportunity to ask the question, how would that actually play out on a landscape surface? And this is the approach which our colleagues in Edinburgh have put forward with their place model, which I don't have time to discuss in detail, which is good because I can't. You have to go and talk to them about it. But what they've basically been able to do is get their resolution down to modeling squares that are about 250 meters on a side, which is pretty good. This is what you get in terms of modern vegetation limits modeled for the Mývatn area. That's what happens if you drop at 1.5 degrees centigrade. So I think you can see here, you're beginning to bring together the tools to answer that question. Okay, it gets a little bit colder. So what? Why would I care? Or better, where would I care? What pieces of this landscape are going to be impacted by this kind of carefully specified level of climate change? Okay, and when will hard times be generated? Now, archaeofauna, animal bone collections are good fun, and that's what I do. And one of our collections comes really nicely dated because it's resting directly on top of the H1300, 1300 AD Hekla tephra. And it is atypical in that it's got lots and lots of very chopped up animal bones, and it's got the remains of the whole pack of dogs. 3 adults, 2 puppies, all apparently et. Now, Icelanders don't eat their dogs, either now or in the past, except when times are very, very hard. It seems like hard times. We also have mixed in the bones of harp seals, who of course ride the sea ice. And the sea ice seems to be present, following Miller et al.'s rapid onset of the Little Ice Age paper, somewhere right around 1300 in this area. Again, remembering the big volcanic eruption, 1258, 1257, drops temperatures drastically. According to our farm production models, if you drop temperatures in this region in the area of something like -2 degrees centigrade, which is within the modeled range that Miller et al. Is putting forward, it is catastrophic. You will have 0 grass growth over much of the area for at least a full year, which means you've got to kill your animals and potentially your dogs. It's a sad story. But it's also a story about survival, because people are going out to the coast and they're getting those harp seals, they're newly available, coming in on the sea ice. And remember, Hofstadter, Mývatn, is 60 kilometers from the coast. So they're going some distance. This is a story of adaptation. It's a story of suffering, but it's also a story of adaptation in hard times. And also, through these hard times, nobody is being allowed to, or nobody is, making the decision that, okay, screw the commons, I'm eating all the ducks because we're hungry. So, thinking about some of the Mývatn story, we have a pretty good evidence. The people of the Mývatn area established a successful wetlands commons governance structure in the 9th century. Now, of course, it's not just about ducks. It's about managing the whole area. It's about hay harvest. It's about all sorts of other things bound up together. They managed it throughout some pretty tough times. In addition to famine, you've also got disease. You've got imperialism. You've got all kinds of things happening to people. So this isn't just a commons management system that is robust in good times. It's a commons management system that's robust in bad times as well. Now, one of the things which archaeology and paleoecology can do together is confirm that, in fact, we do have great time depth to this kind of a system. The problem that we have without a time machine is being able to understand how they did it. Open up the black box of the commons management strategy, the actual details of how they did it. And that's where we need our friends like Astrid Ogilvie, who I wish was here. I'm saying nice things about her. She does wonderful work. Opening up that documentary records, there's tons of material you can pull out of it. It's not just the sagas. There's law codes. There's sheriff's reports. There's a tremendous, wonderful density of published material, and Astrid is a total expert in making use of it. She's also one of the leading lights in the Environmental History Program, Association for Europe, and is a great person to talk to if you want to use environmental history data. And there's a new NSF proposal out there. So just in case anybody out there is a reviewer, so think kindly of Astrid and all of this. There's less formal sources, too. You can do terrible things to Icelanders. You can starve them. You can beat them. You can take away their children. But they'll keep on writing. This is what happens when 10-cent folders of paper hit Iceland with pencils. They write down everything. They fill them up. They translate marks into Icelandic. They do all this stuff. They make their own newspapers. That's what you're looking at in the back. And this material is tremendously valuable for opening up that block box. And of course, since I'm an archaeologist, archaeology goes on being important as a material culture supplement, even when you have dense literacy like this. And of course, yeah, there's bones in there. That stratified deposit behind those smiling people is loaded with all this broken crockery, but it's also loaded with animal bones, including more harp seal bones in the 16th and 17th centuries, when we know it's again very cold. Okay, so place names, to get back to those, are very important. And place names, of course, are held not only in old documents, but they're also held in a living memory. And this is what's going on with the Kids Archaeology, Seniors Archaeology Project Iceland. We have supplied them, thanks to NSF, with some simple GPS and now much cooler iPads. And they're recording place name evidence. They're recording all those stories. They're bothering their elders. They're finding out about all this place-based information, and they're uploading it to Landmælingar Íslands Geodetic Survey of Iceland, to their website, and to ours, where we record our own data spatially. And now we're getting help from the nice people at the National Snow and Ice Data Center, the ALOCA program, which, as many of you know, has been very successful in integrating the local and traditional knowledge of northern native peoples in Canada, Alaska, and Greenland. Now they're really anxious to work with us. They are working with us and our Icelandic friends of getting their hands on this written indigenous long-term record, as well as the living record of the people today. So for takeaways, some things to think about from these examples is that a lot of the things that people say will break down commons management strategies through time didn't happen here. Cheating, elite manipulation, really bad weather, all fail to defeat this commons management over time. Millennial scale sustainable management of these inherently fragile biological resources is demonstrably possible without the intervention of the state. One thing to notice, in 875, when they started this business, there was no state in any part of Scandinavia. Zero. So the duck management came before the first successful kingdoms anywhere in the Scandinavian world, and it certainly predates the arrival of the state in Iceland. So we have then this question of the S word again, sustainability. Again, always ask that question: for whom, of what, how long, at what cost? Sustainability is a package. It's not just conserving a duck or a species. It's conserving, it's managing, it's trying to get through a year, a century. It's trying to survive. It is, in short, part of a package of a knowledge and commons management system. So if we think of local and traditional knowledge, not so much as something quaint and something done by natives, but something which is part of a knowledge system, what's science? How different are all the sciences which are within this room? You know, there's incredibly skilled people doing really cool things in deep water. There are people like me who's using 18th century zooarchaeological techniques to identify little pieces of animal bone. We all have pieces of a knowledge system. How cool would it be if we could actually successfully expand our efforts of sustainability to draw in a much broader human knowledge system, which is outside of academia, which includes duck managers in Iceland who have a day job as well? So some things to think about then. To use the famous NSF words, what are our broader impacts? And I think that one of the things we're looking at here is the past isn't just this quaint thing to look at because it's fun, or something totally irrelevant because the future is going to be completely different. I think, as this example demonstrates, the past actually provides some potential toolkits for resilience. How did they manage those ducks? How did they manage that landscape with the pigs and the puffins in it? We can find this out. And these are pieces of information which have great value now because they have been torture tested through millennia of very hard times. Now, given that we are all facing interesting times, in that Chinese curse sense, if not difficult times, these examples could make a big difference for the future. So we have then some things to think about partnership across communities, by which I definitely mean including our friends in environmental humanities, history, environmental science, the whole shebang, and connecting up to the knowledge which is still held in local places, in local communities. And I think also, this, if we're thinking about the Anthropocene together, is a reason for hope. There's plenty of bad stories of long-term environmental mess management, things going terribly wrong that I could have told you from these same places. But I chose to focus on these because they're pretty cool, but also because they're a reason for hope and not despair. It's very difficult to look ahead in the future, especially after today's presentations, and not feel a little bit of despair over what we are likely to experience in the future and what our children's fate may be. I think under these circumstances, it's very important to look at our common history as humans in an Anthropocene setting and realize it's not all about disaster, it's not all about failure, it's not all about failed stewardship. There are some success stories. I'll end with a couple of commercial messages. Here's one place you can look for more information about all the stuff we're doing. Journal of the North Atlantic, it's online, it's readily available. Check us out. I've got 2 articles posted there which I think might be of interest more widely. And yes, we have animal bones articles on there too, but I thought you might be more interested in some of these. So check out Jonah. Also, Gaia, which you can hear more about tomorrow if you'd like. I've got literature. Also produces a product, and in this case one edited by Jago Cooper and Pace and Sheets. And you can see from the title what it's all about. Trying to use the long-term record of archaeology and paleoenvironment together to provide toolkits for modern communities facing sudden environmental change. And Ben is responsible for that dramatic photograph on the cover. So thank you.